My family skipped my biggest moment to buy my white brother-in-law a Porsche. But when my $86 million company valuation hit Forbes, my dad texted family dinner at 6. Important discussion regarding your obligations. I showed up with the paperwork to completely destroy them. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who only saw you as a bank account. The crystal trophy was heavy in my hands, the award for Innovator of the Year. Around me, the ballroom of the downtown convention center echoed with the applause of 500 tech executives and venture capitalists. I stood on the brightly lit stage smiling for the cameras, but my eyes automatically drifted to table number 4 in the front row. It was completely empty. I had reserved those 6 seats months ago. I had paid for the expensive plated dinners and arranged for a private car to pick up my parents. But the pristine white tablecloth and untouched wine glasses stared back at me, a glaring reminder of exactly where I stood in my family hierarchy. I stepped off the stage, the applause fading into the background hum of networking and clinking glasses. I found a quiet corner near the exit and pulled my phone from my purse. I expected to see missed calls or at least a text claiming there had been a traffic jam or an emergency. Instead, my screen was lit up with notifications from our family group chat. I opened the chat and tapped on the latest video sent by my sister Chloe. The sound of loud cheering and clapping filled my earpiece. The video showed the driveway of our parents' suburban home. My mother Valerie and my father Marcus were standing next to Chloe. In the center of them all was Brad, Chloe's husband, a finance bro who wore his arrogance like a second skin. Brad was leaning against the hood of a brand new silver Porsche. My mother was beaming, her voice cutting through the video as she hugged Brad. She said, "We are just so proud of you, Brad. You bring so much prestige to this family. You are a real provider." I stared at the screen, my grip tightening on my glass trophy. I scrolled up to see the messages sent right before the video. I had texted them 2 hours ago asking if they were still coming to the gala. My father had replied with a dismissive tone that I could practically hear through the screen. He wrote, "Maya, do not be dramatic about us missing your little computer banquet. Brad just closed a major portfolio deal today. He is taking us to the country club this weekend. As a family, we have to support our real breadwinners. It is about respectability and honoring the men who lead this family." My vision blurred with a mix of exhaustion and absolute fury. The real breadwinner. Brad had not held a steady job in 2 years. He traded crypto in his pajamas and used corporate jargon to make my parents feel like they were part of the Wall Street elite. Meanwhile, I was the one keeping the lights on at my parents' failing logistics company. For years, they had weaponized guilt against me, lecturing me about the obligation of the successful black child to carry the family burden. It was the ultimate toxic tax, and I had paid it every single month just to buy a fraction of their approval. I pressed the microphone icon to record a voice note, no longer caring about keeping the peace. I said, "Dad, that little computer banquet was an industry award ceremony. But more importantly, the $10,000 I wired you last Tuesday was specifically to pay the overdue insurance on your commercial trucking fleet. You told me the company was going under, and you needed me to step up and save our legacy. You used my money to put a down payment on a luxury car for Brad." I hit send. I watched the status change to delivered, then read. I waited for the inevitable backlash. I knew exactly what my mother would type next. She would call me bitter. She would say I was jealous of Chloe being married. She would remind me that Brad was a white man from a good family who elevated our social standing at their exclusive church, and that I needed to stop acting like a jealous outcast who could not keep a man. But the reply never came. Instead, my phone vibrated in my hand with a completely different alert. It was a push notification from the Forbes business app. I had known the article was coming, but seeing it finalized sent a jolt of electricity straight down my spine. The headline read, "Breaking. Black female tech founder Maya reaches $86 million valuation in Series B funding for supply chain artificial intelligence firm." I took a deep breath, reading the headline twice to make sure it was real. 5 years of coding in my tiny apartment. 5 years of being mocked at family dinners for playing on my laptop instead of finding a husband. 5 years of being the family disappointment because I refused to be a quiet and obedient secretary for my father's business. It was all validated in that one sentence, $86 million. I swiped back to the family group chat. The silence was deafening. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. I could perfectly picture the chaos happening in that driveway right now. I could imagine Brad staring at his phone, his smug smile dropping as his fragile ego shattered. I could see my father calculating the massive numbers in his head, his greed suddenly overriding his pride. Then a new message popped up on my screen. It was a direct text from my father. The tone had completely shifted from his previous dismissal. He wrote Maya, "Family dinner at Le Petit, 6 p.m. tonight. We have an important discussion regarding your obligations to this family. Do not be late." There was no congratulations. There was no apology for missing my award ceremony. There was no explanation for the stolen $10,000. There was only a command, and the immediate predatory expectation that my success now belonged to them. They saw $86 million and decided it was time to collect their perceived debt. They expected me to simply hand over the keys to my kingdom because we shared the same last name. I did not type a response. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my purse. I looked at the Innovator of the Year trophy one last time, feeling a cold and unbreakable resolve settle over my heart. The scared, desperate daughter seeking their validation was gone. I pulled up my contacts and dialed the number for my lead corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring. I said, "David, I need you to pull the complete financial audit we ran on Marcus Transport. Print everything. The offshore accounts, the forged signatures, the unpaid bank loans. Put it all in a red folder and have it messengered to my office by noon. It is time to bring a gift to a family dinner." Maya pushes through the heavy mahogany doors of Le Petit. The maitre d' guides her past the bustling main dining area and toward the private VIP room at the back of the establishment. She steps inside the heavy velvet curtains closing softly behind her, sealing her in with the very people who had just spent her hard-earned money on a luxury sports car. Valerie does not offer a warm greeting. Instead, her judgmental eyes rake over Maya like a disappointed auditor examining a faulty ledger. Valerie crosses her arms, her heavy diamond bracelets clinking loudly in the quiet room. "You could not have tamed your hair for one evening, Maya. We are at a Michelin-starred restaurant, and you walk in here with your natural curls looking like you just left some sort of protest. Look at your sister." Chloe sat next to Brad, adjusting the thin strap of a shimmering silk designer dress, her perfectly laid extensions cascading down her back. Chloe offered a sympathetic, deeply fake pout. Maya wore a sharply tailored emerald green power suit, a physical manifestation of her own armor. She did not bother defending her hair or her wardrobe choices. She pulled out her own chair and sat down at the table. Before she could even unfold her white linen napkin, Valerie reached into her oversized designer handbag, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and slid a legal document across the cold marble table. It stopped right in front of Maya. The bold black letters at the very top read "Quitclaim Deed." Marcus leans forward, his face tight with a mixture of exhaustion and unwarranted authority. He taps the thick paper with his index finger. "We need you to sign your downtown condo over to the family trust tonight, Maya. The trucking company is experiencing a temporary dip in revenue. We need solid collateral to secure a bridge loan by tomorrow morning, or the bank is going to freeze our operating accounts entirely." Maya looks down at the document, feeling a cold, dark amusement wash over her. The condo she had bought with the profits from her first successful software launch. The only piece of property she owned free and clear. Brad casually swirls the scotch in his expensive crystal glass. He leans back, draping one arm over Chloe's chair, looking at Maya, with the smug entitlement of a mediocre white man who had been handed the keys to a kingdom he did not build. He gives a soft, condescending chuckle. "Listen, Maya, business is extremely risky. Macroeconomic headwinds are battering the logistics sector right now. A girl running a cute little app would not understand the complicated complexities of corporate debt restructuring and macroeconomics. Just sign the condo over to the trust. I will manage the asset, leverage it against the new loan, and make sure you do not lose your little apartment in the process." Maya stares at Brad in absolute silence. A cute little app. That is what he called the artificial intelligence supply chain software that was currently revolutionizing global freight logistics. He was sitting there wearing a luxury watch bought with her stolen money, explaining macroeconomics to her. Maya does not yell. She does not throw her drink across the room. Instead, she raises two fingers, signaling the private sommelier standing discreetly in the corner of the room. The sommelier steps forward immediately. Maya hands him the leather-bound wine list without looking at it. "I will take the 1990 vintage Bordeaux," she says evenly, "and please ensure it breathes properly before pouring." Valerie gasps loudly, her hand flying to her chest in shock. "That bottle is $3,000. Who do you think is paying for that?" Maya leans back, mirroring Brad's relaxed posture. "I am paying for it, Mother. Consider it a celebration of our current family dynamic." The sheer audacity triggers an immediate eruption. Marcus slams his heavy hand on the table, rattling the expensive silverware. "You listen to me," he growls, his voice carrying the heavy weight of patriarchal expectation. "We did not raise you to be this incredibly selfish. I put food on your table for 18 long years. We clothed you. We made sure you always had a safe roof over your head. Now the family business that fed you is struggling, and you sit there ordering $3,000 wine. This is the ultimate problem with your generation. You forget exactly where you come from." Valerie chimes in, her voice rising in frantic, desperate agreement. "It is your fundamental obligation as a daughter to give back. Black families have to stick together in this harsh economy. We have to pool our resources to survive. Brad is doing everything he possibly can to save your father's legacy, working day and night, utilizing his valuable connections. And you want to hoard your little apartment while your own sister might lose her entire inheritance. We paid for your first computer, Maya. You owe this family your livelihood and your respect." Maya listens in absolute silence. The sommelier returns, presenting the ancient dust-covered bottle with profound reverence. He uncorks it expertly, pouring a small amount into Maya's crystal glass. She swirls the dark red liquid, inhales the rich oaky aroma, and takes a slow, deliberate sip. It tastes exactly like victory. She looks directly at her father. "You paid for a used desktop computer when I was 15, Dad. And when I was 19, you kicked me out of the house into the freezing cold because I refused to forge your quarterly tax returns. You told me I was a useless burden, and that Chloe was the only daughter who truly respected the family name. Now you want the useless burden to hand over her only home." Chloe dramatically dabs her completely dry eyes with a cloth napkin. "Why do you always have to live in the past, Maya? We are talking about right now. Brad is literally trying to help you. He is offering his Wall Street expertise to manage your property so you do not ruin it. You should be thanking him instead of acting like a bitter, jealous outcast." Brad smiles proudly, clearly relishing the blind devotion of his wife and her parents. He takes another slow sip of his scotch, preparing to deliver yet another long lecture on his financial brilliance. He opens his mouth to speak, but a sharp, persistent buzzing sound interrupts him. The Apple Watch, firmly strapped to Brad's wrist, begins to vibrate frantically against his skin. It is not just one simple notification. It is a relentless, continuous stream of emergency alerts, one after another, lighting up the small digital screen in rapid succession. Brad sighs heavily, looking deeply annoyed by the sudden interruption. "Let me just silence this real quick," he mutters, glancing down at his wrist to dismiss the alert. Maya watches his face intently. She watches the exact moment the arrogant, condescending smirk slides completely off his features. She watches the blood drain rapidly from his cheeks, leaving his face a sickly pale shade of white. His eyes widen in absolute, unadulterated terror as his brain comprehends the scrolling text of the Forbes breaking news alert. He completely forgets how to breathe. The large sip of expensive scotch goes straight down the wrong pipe. Brad begins to violently choke, coughing and sputtering wildly as he clutches the edge of the marble table for support. Chloe shrieks in panic, patting his back frantically, repeatedly asking him what is wrong. Brad cannot answer her. He just stares across the table at Maya, his chest heaving violently, his voice coming out in a strangled, high-pitched wheeze. 86 million. The words hung in the suffocating silence of the VIP dining room like a live grenade. Brad stared at his Apple Watch, his chest heaving, his face drained of all color. The shift in the room was violent and immediate. The heavy tension evaporated, replaced instantly by a suffocating, desperate wave of hypocrisy. Valerie pushed her chair back so violently it screeched against the polished hardwood floor. She quickly lunged forward, her arms outstretched, her heavy diamond bracelets clattering as she attempted to wrap me in a tight embrace. I leaned back into the plush leather of my chair, completely avoiding her grasp. Valerie did not even seem to notice the physical rejection. Her face, which seconds ago had looked at me with absolute disgust, was now glowing with a frantic artificial pride. "I always knew it," Valerie shrieked, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "The pride of our bloodline, our beautiful, brilliant daughter. I told everyone at the country club that you were just focusing on your empire. I told the church committee that you were destined for greatness. Look at what God has done for this family today. We are truly blessed." I quietly took another slow sip of my $3,000 Bordeaux. The speed at which she abandoned her harsh critique of my natural hair and my tailored suit to claim ownership of my success was truly a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Marcus did not bother with the emotional performance. He slammed his heavy hand down on the marble table, but this time it was not out of anger. It was a gesture of absolute, undeniable entitlement. "This is exactly what I am talking about," Marcus boomed, his chest puffed out with unearned authority. "This is the legacy of this family coming to fruition. You see what happens when you finally apply yourself, Maya. Now pull out your checkbook. I need $5 million wired to the transport company operating account by tomorrow morning. We are going to reinvest your little windfall into a real, tangible legacy. The black tax is not a burden, it is your duty. It is finally time to pay your dues and elevate the family name to where it belongs." He did not ask. He ordered me. He genuinely believed that my blood, sweat, and tears over the last 5 years were simply an incubation period for his personal bailout fund. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of my father demanding $5 million like he was ordering a side of fries, Chloe let out a loud, dramatic wail. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she forced out dry, tearless sobs. "I sacrificed everything for you," Chloe cried out, peering at me through her perfectly manicured fingers. "Do you have any idea how hard my childhood was? I had to tiptoe around the house for years while you locked yourself in your room writing code. I gave up my peace and quiet so you could build this company. I protected your focus when no one else did. I deserve back pay for being a supportive sister." I stared back at her in total disbelief. Chloe had spent our entire youth blasting music, throwing wild parties, and complaining to our parents that I was a weird, antisocial loser who ruined her aesthetic. Now she was claiming she was the silent architect of my entire tech empire. "I am drowning financially," Chloe whined, dropping her hands to reveal her completely dry eyes. "Brad and I have expenses to maintain our lifestyle. You need to pay off my American Express cards right now. It is only $150,000. That is basically pennies to you now. Consider it back pay for my sisterly sacrifice. You owe me a fresh start today." I set my wine glass down very carefully. I looked at the three of them. My mother claiming my brilliance for her church friends. My father demanding $5 million. My sister demanding a six-figure credit card bailout. They had completely forgotten the quitclaim deed sitting on the table. They had completely forgotten that 10 minutes ago I was a useless burden. Brad finally stopped coughing. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and aggressively cleared his throat. He sat up completely straight, desperately trying to reassemble his shattered finance bro persona. He smoothed the lapels of his custom suit, putting on his best condescending smile. "Okay, let us all take a deep breath and look at the reality of the situation," Brad said, his voice dripping with smooth, calculated manipulation. "Maya, congratulations, truly. But you need to understand that Forbes valuations are just paper money. It is an illusion. It is a target painted squarely on your back." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to make himself look large and commanding. "You are in dangerous territory now, Maya. You are walking into rooms with ruthless predators. You are a young black woman with a massive financial target on her back. The Wall Street sharks are going to circle you and they will tear you apart before you even realize you are bleeding. You need protection immediately. You need to secure those assets. Let me set up a blind trust for you. Let me personally handle all the offshore allocations and shield your capital from the tax man. When you are dealing with this level of wealth, you need a white man in the room to negotiate. They will naturally respect me. They will try to play you. Let me protect your money. He smiled at me, a predatory, sickeningly sweet smile. He was literally offering to use his racial privilege to save me from my own success, while simultaneously trying to gain complete legal control over my $86 million net worth. I did not even blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into the side pocket of my emerald green blazer and pulled out a sleek metallic red flash drive. The heavy metal felt cool and solid against my fingertips. I slowly held it up between my index and middle finger, letting it catch the dim light of the chandelier. Brad stared at it, his fake smile faltering slightly. I leaned across the marble table holding his terrified gaze and dropped the red flash drive directly into his empty crystal Scotch glass. It landed with a sharp, heavy clink that echoed loudly through the silent VIP room. "Set up a blind trust for me, Brad," I asked, my voice deadly quiet and razor sharp. "You mean exactly like the secret blind trust you used to funnel $2 million of my parents' retirement funds into a dead crypto scam?" Brad did not hesitate. The mask of the sophisticated financial advisor vanished in a split second, replaced by the frantic desperation of a cornered animal. He lunged across the expensive marble table, his large hands grasping wildly for the crystal glass. He knocked over a salt shaker and sent silver cutlery clattering to the floor in his frantic attempt to retrieve the red flash drive. I was faster. I snatched the glass away just as his fingers grazed the rim, smoothly plucking the metal drive from the bottom. I slipped it safely back into my blazer pocket while Brad collapsed back into his chair, his chest heaving, a thin layer of sweat suddenly shimmering on his forehead. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Marcus stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward and crashed onto the floor. Valerie slammed her hands on the table, her eyes bulging with manufactured outrage. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a jealous, bitter liar!" Valerie shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceiling of the VIP room. "You have always been jealous of your sister. You have always hated that Chloe found a good husband while you sat alone with your computers. You are fabricating this entire story just to ruin her marriage because you are miserable." I looked at my mother, marveling at her capacity for delusion. She was literally watching her golden son-in-law sweat through his custom-tailored suit, yet she still chose to aim her venom at her own flesh and blood. "Brad comes from a highly respectable family." Valerie continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "He elevated our status. He got us into the elite tier of the country club. He brought prestige to this family name. You will not sit here and disrespect a man of his caliber just because you stumbled into some diversity-funded luck with your little software company." Diversity-funded luck. The microaggression hung in the air, a familiar weapon she had used countless times to diminish my hard work. I did not raise my voice to argue. I simply unclasped the gold latch of my leather briefcase. I pulled out a thick-bound stack of official banking documents. I tossed them smoothly across the table. The heavy stack landed dead center on Valerie's plate, splashing expensive sauce onto her pristine white dress. "Read them, Mother," I commanded, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Those are the routing numbers. Those are the authorization logs." Brad slammed his fist onto the table, finally dropping the polite, cultured facade he had worn since the day he married into my family. His face twisted into a sneer of pure, unadulterated contempt. The coded language he usually hid behind vanished completely. "You think you are so smart," Brad spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You think because some Silicon Valley guilt trip handed you a massive valuation to meet their diversity quotas, that you suddenly understand real finance. You are an affirmative action charity case, Maya. You do not know how corporate capital restructuring works. You do not know what it takes to keep a business afloat in the real world." I was moving funds to protect the assets from market volatility. I let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. "Protecting the assets? Is that what you call wiring $2 million to a shell company in the Cayman Islands registered under your own name?" I flipped open my own copy of the dossier, reading the exact details out loud to the room. IP address 192.168.0.4. That is your personal laptop, Brad. The one my parents bought for you last Christmas. Date of transfer, October 14th. Amount transferred, $500,000 from my parents' joint retirement fund. Destination, a defunct crypto exchange that went bankrupt 3 weeks later. And let's not forget the remaining 1.5 million diverted directly into a holding account you used to cover the losses on your personal day trading failures. Marcus gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white as the reality of my words began to penetrate his stubborn pride. He looked from me to Brad, waiting for a coherent denial. Brad just sat there, his mouth opening and closing silently, the veins in his neck bulging. Chloe jumped up from her seat, her face completely drained of color. The realization that her luxury lifestyle, her designer bags, and her brand new Porsche were funded by stolen money was finally crashing down on her. But instead of turning her anger toward the man who had defrauded her family, she turned to the scapegoat. She turned to me. "You are making this up!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You faked these papers. You hired someone to hack his accounts and plant this information. You fabricated all of this just to ruin my life because you cannot stand to see me happy." Before I could even brace myself, Chloe lunged around the table. She raised her hand and slapped me hard across the left side of my face. The sharp crack echoed through the room. My head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. A stinging heat radiated across my cheek, but I did not stumble. I did not cry out. I did not even flinch. I slowly turned my head back to face her. I calmly reached up and wiped my cheek with my fingers, fixing my eyes directly on my sister. Her hand was shaking violently, and the false bravado was already draining from her eyes, replaced by a profound, creeping terror. She knew I was telling the truth. She was just terrified of the consequences. I reached into my briefcase one last time. "If you think I ruined your life, Chloe, you should ask your husband why you are about to be homeless." I pulled out a second document printed on bright pink paper and slid it directly toward her shaking hands. It was a formal stamped legal notice. Marcus leaned over, squinting to read the bold print at the top of the page. Notice of foreclosure. I looked straight at Brad, whose eyes were fixed firmly on the floor. "Brad stopped paying the mortgage on your precious family estate 6 months ago," I stated clearly, letting the absolute devastation of the truth settle over the room. "He drained the commercial accounts, he emptied the retirement funds, and when there was nothing left to steal, he let the bank come for the house. The auction is scheduled for 30 days from now. Your prestige is gone, your money is gone, and your home is gone." Absolute chaos erupted inside the VIP dining room. Marcus snatched the bright pink paper from the table, his hands trembling so violently that the edges of the foreclosure notice blurred. He read the bold print twice, his breath hitching in his throat. He clutched his chest, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple as he collapsed into his chair, gasping for air. Valerie shrieked, rushing to his side. Chloe sat entirely frozen, her mouth open in a silent scream. Marcus did not turn his wrath toward Brad. He did not grab the white son-in-law who had just squandered his entire legacy. His bloodshot eyes locked directly onto me. He slammed his fist onto the table with enough force to crack a plate. "You will fix this," Marcus roared, spit flying from his lips as he pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You have $86 million. You will call the bank right now and wire whatever they need to clear this debt. I gave you life, Maya. You owe me your existence. You will pay off this mortgage immediately and save this family from ruin." I did not flinch. I did not move to comfort him. I simply picked up my crystal glass and took another slow, deliberate sip of my $3,000 Bordeaux. The wine tasted even richer now. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit in the suffocating weight of their own consequences. "Do you remember the winter I turned 19? Dad?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm against his booming panic. "You came into my bedroom at 2 in the morning and threw a stack of falsified logbooks and blank tax forms on my desk. You demanded that I cook the books for the trucking company because your accountant had just quit in disgust. And when I refused to commit federal tax fraud for you, Do you remember what you did? Marcus swallowed hard, the purple flush in his face shifting into a sickly gray. He knew exactly what he had done, but he could not bring himself to say it out loud. You called me a useless burden. I continued enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. You grabbed me by the collar of my pajamas, dragged me to the front door, and threw me out into the freezing rain without a coat or my wallet. You told me that a daughter who refused to protect her father's business was no daughter of yours. You let me sleep on the floor of a 24-hour laundromat for 3 days. You told the entire church congregation that I had run away to live a life of sin. So no, Dad, I will not be wiring a single cent to save your house. The useless burden is officially closed for business. Valerie let out a loud, dramatic wail, burying her face in her hands. Chloe began hyperventilating, aggressively pulling at her expensive designer hair extensions as the reality of impending homelessness finally registered in her hollow brain. That was when Brad decided to intervene. He adjusted his silk tie, desperately trying to summon the arrogant finance bro persona that had manipulated my parents for years. He stood up, puffing out his chest, attempting to loom over me with his physical presence. You are crossing a very dangerous line, Maya, Brad growled, pointing a threatening finger at my face. You think you can just waltz in here and terrorize this family with stolen financial records. I am going to sue you for corporate espionage. I am going to sue you for defamation. I will tie you up in litigation so fast your little tech startup will bleed out in legal fees. You do not understand how real wealth operates. You do not understand the leverage I have. I raised a single eyebrow, looking at him with absolute boredom. Your leverage. Yes, my leverage. Brad spat, leaning closer, his breath reeking of expensive scotch and desperation. I know the executives at that bank. We play golf together. We sit on the same charity boards. They are not going to foreclose on a legacy family just because of a temporary liquidity issue. I will make one phone call tomorrow morning, and my connections will squash this notice before you can even finish your breakfast. You played a cute little trick tonight, Maya, but the adults are back in charge now. I will have this mortgage restructured by noon. I could not contain it anymore. A genuine full-throated laugh escaped my lips. The sound was so jarring, so entirely devoid of fear, that it made Brad physically recoil. I reached into my leather briefcase one final time. I pulled out a heavy matte black business card with thick gold embossed lettering. I flicked my wrist, sending the card sliding perfectly across the smooth marble table. It stopped right in front of Brad, coming to rest precisely on top of the pink foreclosure notice. You really should read the fine print on those legal notices, Brad, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. The bank you think you are going to call tomorrow morning does not own the debt on this estate anymore. When a mortgage goes 6 months into default, the bank offloads it for pennies on the dollar to private holding firms. They sold your bad debt 2 weeks ago to a venture capital acquisitions group. Brad stared at the gold-embossed card. His eyes frantically darted back and forth as he read the name of the holding firm printed on the thick black cardstock, and then read my name printed directly beneath it as the sole executive officer. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together on the table, delivering the final crushing blow. You cannot call your golf buddies to save you, Brad. Your connections cannot squash this. My own holding firm bought the debt. I am the bank. I literally own your entire house right now. The silence that followed was absolute. The kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that sucks all the oxygen out of a room. The faint jazz music playing over the restaurant speakers seemed to mock the absolute destruction sitting on the marble table. Marcus stared at the gold-embossed business card, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. The great patriarch, the man who demanded respect and absolute obedience from everyone in his orbit, was reduced to a shell of a man staring at a piece of cardstock. Then Valerie broke the silence. She did not yell this time. She deployed a weapon she had spent decades perfecting, the performance of the holy martyr. Tears began to stream down her impeccably made-up face. She clasped her hands together, pressing them to her chest as she looked up at the ceiling, invoking the heavens. Maya, how could you do this to your own flesh and blood? Valerie wept, her voice trembling with practiced agony. After everything we sacrificed to give you a name to be proud of. This is a sin against God. You do not throw your own parents out onto the street. The Lord commands you to honor your mother and your father. It is your duty to carry the family. It is the black tax. We lift each other up. We do not destroy our own elders. I sat back in my plush leather chair, swirling the last sip of my Bordeaux. The absolute hypocrisy of her invoking God and the struggles of our community to cover up Brad committing wire fraud was staggering. She was weaponizing our culture to defend the very man who was actively destroying it. You want to talk about honoring your family, mother? I asked, keeping my voice incredibly level. You want to talk about the duties of care? Let us rewind the clock to when I was 16 years old. Do you remember that Sunday afternoon? I was lying on the bathroom floor screaming in agony because my appendix had just ruptured. I begged you to take me to the emergency room. I begged you to help me. Valerie froze, the fake tears suddenly stalling on her cheeks. Do you remember what you said to me? I pressed on, leaning forward slightly. You told me to take an aspirin and stop being dramatic because you were already dressed in your Sunday best. You had the annual church committee mixer to attend. You were slated to be photographed for the parish newsletter alongside the local alderman, and you simply could not arrive with wrinkled clothes from sitting in a hospital waiting room. You left your teenage daughter writhing on the floor because maintaining your status at a church mixer was more important than my life. I had to call an ambulance myself. I woke up from emergency surgery completely alone. Marcus looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her designer dress suddenly looking like a cheap costume. You do not care about family, mother. I stated my words, cutting through the air like shattered glass. You care about how things look. You worship appearances. You worship the country club memberships, the front row pews at church, and the prestige of having a white finance bro son-in-law to parade around your friends. But the reality is, your entire life is built on a rotting foundation. And now you have none of it left. The facade is gone. Valerie let out a genuine sob, this time burying her face in her hands. The reality of losing her suburban mansion, the ultimate symbol of her perceived superiority, was finally crashing down on her. I turned my attention back to Marcus, who was still staring blankly at the foreclosure notice. I am giving you two choices, Dad, and neither of them involves me writing a check to save your ego. Option 1. You and Mother have exactly 30 days to pack your bags and vacate the property. I will have my security team escort you off the premises on the 31st day. The house will be liquidated to recoup the funds Brad stole. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wide with panic. And what is the second option? He rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Option 2, I replied smoothly. You sign over 100% of Marcus Transport to my holding firm tonight. You transfer full executive control, every single share, every asset, and every liability directly to me. You walk away with nothing, but I will halt the foreclosure on the house. You get to keep your roof, but you lose your legacy. Marcus looked like he had been physically struck. The trucking company was his entire identity. It was the business he had built to prove he was a titan of industry. Giving it up meant admitting complete and total defeat. Brad, who had been sitting in terrified silence, suddenly perked up. The arrogant, scheming finance bro saw an opening and could not resist taking the bait. He leaned over to Marcus, adjusting his tie, trying to play the savior one last time. Sign it over, Marcus, Brad urged, his voice hurried and frantic. Take the deal. The trucking company is drowning in debt anyway. The operating costs are astronomical and the fleet is falling apart. We cannot secure any more credit. Let her take the company. She thinks she is getting an empire, but she is really just taking on a massive financial anchor. Give her the dead weight and save the house. We can rebuild later. Brad looked at me, a brief flash of smug superiority returning to his face. He genuinely thought he was outsmarting me. He thought he was tossing me a sinking ship to save his own luxurious living situation. I looked at Brad. I looked at the tailored suit he bought with my parents' retirement money. I looked at the desperate, calculating gleam in his eyes. And I smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was a dead, predatory expression that made the room temperature drop 10 degrees. Oh, Brad, I said, my voice dripping with dark amusement. I know the company is bleeding. I know the margins are terrible and the fleet is outdated. I know exactly how much toxic debt is sitting on those ledgers. But you are missing the point entirely. I am not taking the company to run trucks. Brad frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? I am taking the company to seize the financial records, I explained, watching the color drain from his face for the second time that night. When I own 100% of Marcus Transport, I have complete unrestricted access to every single corporate bank account, every wire transfer log, and every server. I am not taking over a logistics business. I am taking over a crime scene. I am initiating a full, unrestricted forensic audit, utilizing my firm's artificial intelligence software to track every single penny that has gone missing over the last 3 years. Chloe gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Marcus stared at Brad, the realization of what was about to happen dawning on him. I stood up, buttoning the front of my emerald green blazer. I looked down at Brad, who was now trembling visibly, his hands shaking against the marble table. You see, Brad, I said, my voice ringing out clearly in the silent room. When a company changes ownership, a mandatory audit is standard procedure. And guess who the police look at first? When corporate funds go missing, and the digital footprints lead directly to offshore crypto accounts. Enjoy your next 30 days. I suggest you spend them finding a very good criminal defense attorney. Red and blue lights slice through the sheer curtains of the VIP room at Le Petit Painting, the expensive wallpaper in frantic strokes of color. The shrieking wail of police sirens approaches rapidly, completely drowning out the soft jazz music that had been playing over the restaurant speakers. The reality of the situation hits Brad like a physical blow to the chest. The smug Wall Street facade, the carefully crafted image of the untouchable finance expert, melts completely into pure, unadulterated cowardice. He stumbles backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the polished hardwood floor, knocking his heavy dining chair backward with a loud, chaotic clatter. He looks at the flashing lights reflecting on the window panes, then looks directly at Chloe. He points a shaking, sweaty finger at his wife, his chest heaving with panic. Tell them it was you. Brad screams, his voice cracking with pure hysteria, dropping all pretense of love or partnership. Tell the police you forced me to do it. You manipulated the accounts. Chloe stares at him, her tear-streaked face twisting into genuine, horrified shock. The golden child, who had never faced a single consequence in her entire pampered life, is suddenly staring down the barrel of a federal criminal investigation. Brad does not stop to let her process the massive betrayal. He paces the room like a caged animal, throwing his hands in the air as he spins a desperate narrative to save his own skin. You could not stop swiping that platinum credit card, Chloe. You needed the $50,000 designer bags. You needed the constant first-class trips to Milan and Dubai, just to impress your pathetic fake Instagram followers. I had to borrow that corporate money just to keep your delusional lifestyle afloat. I committed fraud for you. The accusation snaps Chloe entirely out of her shock. Her vanity and pride ignite into a furious, uncontrollable rage. Chloe grabs her heavy crystal water goblet and hurls the ice-cold liquid directly into Brad's face. The water splashes violently across his custom-tailored suit, leaving him dripping and pathetic, his slicked-back hair falling messily into his eyes. Borrow the money! Chloe shrieks, her voice echoing off the marble walls with deafening volume. You have not had a real job in 24 months, you absolute fraud. Do not stand there and blame my handbags when I saw the credit card statements for that luxury apartment downtown. Marcus and Valerie freeze, the breath knocked completely out of their lungs. Chloe turns to her parents, her face twisted with a mixture of deep shame and absolute fury. She points a perfectly manicured finger at her dripping, shivering husband. He used your retirement funds to pay for a luxury loft for his 22-year-old mistress, Chloe, screams the ugly truth finally tearing its way out of her throat. He told me it was a corporate staging suite for his high-net-worth clients. I have been covering for his unemployed, cheating self for 2 years because I was too embarrassed to tell you the truth. I wanted everyone to think I had the perfect marriage. The revelation shatters the final illusion of the perfect white son-in-law. The prestigious, respectable finance bro, who was supposed to elevate their social standing at the country club, was nothing but a broke, cheating thief living off a hard-working black family's wealth. Marcus lets out a primal, agonizing roar. The respectability politics, the careful curation of their high society image, vanish in an instant. Marcus lunges across the massive dining table. He grabs Brad by the collar of his soaked shirt, slamming the younger man backward into the expensive wine rack lining the restaurant wall. Bottles crash to the floor, shattering into a sea of red wine and broken glass that looks dangerously like pooling blood. I trusted you. Marcus roars, his large hands wrapping tightly around Brad's lapels, shaking the man violently against the wall. I gave you the keys to my entire kingdom. I chose you over my own daughter because you promised to elevate this family. You stole my legacy to pay for your mistress. Brad wildly swings his arms desperately, trying to push the older man off his voice, pitching into a terrified squeal as he begs for his life. While the two men grapple in the spilled wine and broken glass, Valerie completely loses her mind. She drops to her knees right there in the VIP room. She crawls across the sticky, dangerous floor, completely disregarding her ruined designer dress and her ruined dignity. She grabs the hem of my tailored trousers, her face stained with running mascara and thick, desperate tears. Maya, please, she begs, her voice shaking with raw, unfiltered desperation. Please call them off. You have the money. You have the power. Call the police and tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. I look down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but cold closure. Do not let them walk in here, Valerie continues to sob, digging her nails into my pant leg. If they drag your father and your sister's husband out of here in handcuffs, we will be ruined. The entire church congregation will find out by morning. The country club will revoke our membership immediately. We will be a laughingstock in the community. You are destroying our reputation. Maya, you have to protect the family name. I slowly pull my leg back, forcing her to release her desperate grip. You never cared about character, Mother. I say, my voice cold and steady, slicing cleanly through the noise of the physical fight. You only cared about the performance. You worshipped a parasite because he came with the right skin color and the right zip code. You let him steal your future because you were too busy trying to look wealthy to actually protect your wealth. Now you can sit here and watch your beautiful performance burn to the ground. Heavy boots thunder down the restaurant hallway. The mahogany doors of the VIP room burst open with incredible force. 4 uniformed police officers storm into the room, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. Police. Nobody move. The lead officer commands, his eyes scanning the absolute wreckage of the dining room, the shattered glass, the spilled wine, and the 2 men fighting against the wall. Marcus freezes instantly, his hands still gripping Brad's ruined shirt, panting heavily from the exertion. Brad sees the officers, and the cowardly survival instinct of his privilege kicks into high gear. He violently shoves Marcus away, scrambling backward toward the police officers with his hands raised high in the air in mock surrender. He cowers behind the lead officer, panting and pointing a trembling accusatory finger directly at the father who took him in and fed him. Arrest the old man! Brad screams, his voice echoing shrilly in the sudden terrifying silence of the room. He is the CEO. He is the one who signed all the bank authorization forms. I was just a consultant doing what he ordered. The police officers react immediately to Brad, panicked shrieks. Taking in the chaotic scene, they see a large black man holding a dripping, shivering white man against a shattered wine rack. Implicit bias does the rest. The lead officer draws his taser, barking at Marcus to drop the suspect and put his hands behind his head. Marcus, breathless and bleeding slightly from a scratch on his cheek, freezes. He lets go of Brad's ruined shirt and takes a step back, raising his hands in compliance. Brad seizes the moment, scrambling behind the officers and putting on the performance of a lifetime. He stutters, his voice cracking with manufactured terror, claiming he was just an outside financial consultant hired to audit the books. He tells the officers that when he discovered Marcus embezzling company funds, the old man flew into a violent rage and tried to kill him. Brad weaves a masterful tale of victimhood, using corporate buzzwords to paint my father as a corrupt, aggressive thug running a criminal enterprise. The officers do not question the terrified white man in the custom suit. 2 of them grab Marcus roughly by the shoulders, slamming him face first against the intact mahogany wall. The harsh metallic click of handcuffs echoes through the VIP dining room. Marcus groans as they pull his arms back, his pride completely shattered, humiliated in the very establishment he thought solidified his high society status. Valerie watches her husband getting read his rights. She does not run to his side. She does not scream at the officers that her husband is innocent. Instead, she scrambles up from the sticky wine-soaked floor and grabs my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my emerald green blazer. Maya, you have to fix this right now. Valerie hisses, her eyes wild with a terrifying delusional panic. You just got valued at $86 million. You have liquid capital. I need you to call your bank and get enough cash to post bail for Brad immediately. I stare down at her, absolutely repulsed. My father is being patted down like a common criminal, and my mother is begging me to bail out the man who framed him. I ask her why on earth I would spend a single cent on the parasite who destroyed her life. Valerie shakes my arm frantically. Because Chloe cannot be a divorced single mother, Valerie screams, gesturing to my sister, who is currently weeping over her ruined designer heels. Brad comes from a prominent family. If he goes to jail, Chloe loses everything. Our country club membership will be revoked. The church elders will gossip about us for decades. You have to save Brad so we can handle this quietly and keep our reputation intact. You must protect your sister's marriage to save our dignity. The absolute rot of her respectability politics makes me sick to my stomach. She is willing to let her black husband rot in a federal penitentiary just to keep a white man smiling in her family photos. I pry her fingers off my jacket, pushing her away with absolute disgust. I turn my back on my mother and step directly between the arresting officers and the exit. Excuse me, detective, I say, projecting my voice with the clear, unwavering authority of a CEO who owns the room. You are currently handcuffing the victim and protecting the perpetrator. The lead officer scowls, telling me to step aside and stop interfering with an active arrest. I do not move an inch. I reach into my leather briefcase and pull out a thick, sealed red dossier. This is a complete forensic data extraction, I state loudly, handing the heavy file directly to the lead detective. I own a supply chain artificial intelligence firm. We just ran a deep diagnostic on Marcus Transport. What you will find on page 1 is irrefutable proof that Brad used a virtual private network to spoof his location, but he forgot to mask his device's unique media access control address. The IP logs match his laptop perfectly. Flip to page 3, and you will see the digital signature authorization forms he claims my father signed. They were executed using a forged digital token while my father was physically hospitalized for knee surgery last year, making it impossible for him to have authorized those offshore wire transfers. The detective pauses. He looks at me, then down at the meticulously organized color-coded evidence. He flips open the folder. The room holds its breath as his eyes scan the executive summary. My legal team prepared the data so cleanly that even a rookie could understand the magnitude of the wire fraud. The detective looks up, his expression hardening as he stares directly at Brad. Brad realizes the performance is over. He tries backing away toward the kitchen doors, but an officer immediately blocks his path. The lead detective gives a sharp nod. Release the older gentleman, the detective orders. The two officers quickly unlock the handcuffs, stepping away awkwardly. Marcus rubs his wrists, sagging against the wall, staring at the floor in absolute defeated silence. The officers immediately converge on Brad. They grab his arms, twisting them behind his back with significantly more force than they used on my father. Brad completely loses his mind. The polite, cultured veneer shatters into a million pieces. He thrashes wildly, kicking at the officer's shins, screaming profanities, and demanding to call his wealthy father. He thrashes so hard that an expensive leather shoe flies off his foot, sliding across the room. As the police drag Brad out of the VIP room, kicking and screaming like a petulant child, the flashing red and blue lights continue to paint the walls. Valerie ignores my father. She spins around to face me, her face contorted with an ugly, inhuman rage. You just ruined this family name, Valerie screams, her voice cracking with fury. How will I ever show my face at church again? Valerie's shriek hung heavily in the freezing air of the VIP room. I stared directly at my mother, completely devoid of any emotion. I watched tears streak her expensive foundation, but there was no empathy left to give her. My father had just been violently shoved against a wall, thrown in handcuffs, and nearly framed for a federal crime by the white son-in-law she worshipped. Yet her only concern was what the ladies at Sunday service would whisper about her. She cared only about maintaining her glossy, fraudulent image. I did not yell back or try to reason with a woman whose moral compass was dictated by respectability politics. I turned my head and locked eyes with the terrified maitre d' standing frozen in the doorway. I raised one hand, snapping my fingers to summon him. He scurried over, stepping over the puddle of red wine and shattered glass. I pulled a black titanium credit card from my pocket and held it out. "Bring me the check immediately," I commanded smoothly. "Add the damaged wall, the broken bottles, and shattered glasses to the total. Do not spare a single expense." The maitre d' nodded frantically, producing a black leather folio with trembling hands. I opened it. The bill alone was over $2,000, driven by the vintage Bordeaux I ordered. I took a gold pen and signed my name with deliberate strokes. I added a $3,000 tip, ensuring the staff was compensated for enduring my family chaotic performance. I closed the folio and handed it to the maitre d', who bowed his head before sprinting out. The financial transaction was remarkably swift. It was the ultimate display of power, a stark contrast to the financial ruin facing the three people left standing. As the reality of Brad's arrest and the frozen bank accounts penetrated her skull, Chloe let out a sharp gasp. She looked at the door where the police dragged her husband away, then whipped her head to me. Absolute panic completely consumed her features. She scrambled across the sticky floor, her heels slipping on the spilled wine, and threw herself at me. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging painfully into my suit. "Maya, you have to help me," Chloe sobbed, her fake tears replaced by genuine terror. "Brad is gone. His accounts will be frozen. I have no access to cash. My credit cards are tied to his corporate accounts. You have to let me move into your penthouse tonight. I have nowhere else to go. I cannot stay at the suburban house, the bank is taking it. You are my sister. You have $86 million. You have plenty of room. Please take me in." I looked at her hands gripping my sleeve, feeling an overwhelming surge of pure disgust. I pried her trembling fingers off my jacket, pushing her away with deliberate force. "Do you remember the winter I was 20? Chloe," I asked, my voice carrying the freezing temperature of a blizzard. "I was working 2 jobs while taking night classes, and I came back to the apartment we shared. I accidentally tracked mud onto your cheap living room rug. You threw a massive tantrum, screaming that I was ruining your aesthetic. You shoved me out the front door into a snowstorm and locked the deadbolt. You left me standing on the frozen concrete in a thin sweater for 5 hours. You ignored my knocks and calls because you were busy entertaining your sorority friends. I almost got frostbite that night while you laughed warmly inside." Chloe stepped back, her mouth opening and closing, searching for a defense that did not exist. I stared her down, my posture rigid and unforgiving. "So no, Chloe. You are not stepping one foot inside my penthouse. You made your bed with a thief and a fraud. Now you get to lie in it. You wanted the prestige of his luxury sports car so badly. Go sleep in the Porsche." I turned away from my sister, leaving her shivering and weeping in the center of the ruined dining room. I calmly gathered my documents from the marble table. I placed the forensic data backup drives, the property deeds, and the foreclosure notices back into my leather briefcase. I snapped the gold latches shut, the sharp metallic click echoing loudly. I looked at my father. Marcus slumped into a chair, his head buried in his hands, staring blankly at the floor in absolute suffocating shame. He had bet his entire legacy on the wrong person, betraying his own blood for proximity to whiteness, and it had cost him everything. I then looked over at my mother. Valerie was still weeping loudly, mourning the death of her social status. She was not crying for her husband. She was crying for the country club memberships she would never use again. Neither of them looked up as I buttoned my blazer. They had completely run out of excuses, insults, and leverage. I picked up my briefcase and walked purposefully toward the exit. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the wreckage of my so-called family one final time. "The eviction stands," I announced, my voice carrying absolute finality. "The hostile takeover of the trucking company is complete. Have a truly great night, Mom." I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and walked down the hallway, leaving their sobbing behind me. I stepped out of the restaurant and into the crisp night air. The city lights sparkled against the dark sky. A sleek black Maybach was idling gracefully at the curb. My driver stepped out, opening the rear door with a respectful nod. I slipped into the luxurious leather back seat, perfectly victorious and ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks pass. For Valerie, living in reality has always been optional. Tonight is the annual Founders Gala at the Oak Ridge Heritage Club, the undisputed pinnacle of Black elite society in the city. It is the one night of the year where respectability politics, generational wealth, and high society gossip collide under crystal chandeliers. For decades, Valerie has treated this club as her personal kingdom. She refuses to let a minor inconvenience like her impending eviction or her white son-in-law sitting in a county jail cell keep her from making an entrance. She arrives wearing a vintage couture gown, her chin tilted up, projecting the false image of an untouchable matriarch. She struts into the grand marble foyer, flanked by a dozen of her wealthy peers, waiting in line at the registration desk. The air is thick with expensive perfume and the low murmur of jazz. Valerie steps up to the velvet rope, completely ignoring the people behind her, and slides a heavy platinum card across the mahogany desk to pay her overdue annual membership and the gala entry fee. The young attendant swipes the card. The machine beeps a harsh, discordant tone. Declined. Valerie scoffs loudly, blaming the machine, and digs into her designer clutch to produce a second card. The attendant swipes it. Declined again. The murmurs in the lobby suddenly stop. The wealthy attendees standing behind Valerie exchange sharp, judging glances. The silence stretches thick and suffocating as Valerie frantically pulls out a third card. The machine beeps its rejection one more time. "Excuse me," Valerie snaps, her voice rising in pitch as panic finally breaches her perfectly powdered facade. "Your system is clearly malfunctioning. Run it manually. Do you know who I am? I am a founding legacy member." A sharp, familiar voice cuts through the tension. "Actually, Valerie, the system is working perfectly." Maxine, the newly elected club president, steps out from the back office. Valerie visibly stiffens. For years, Valerie used her position on the membership committee to mock Maxine for being a self-made woman who did not come from old money. Valerie had actively campaigned against Maxine running for president, calling her too common for their elite circle. Now Maxine stands behind the desk, her arms crossed, thoroughly enjoying the spectacular collapse of her former bully. "Your accounts are frozen," Valerie Maxine announces, her voice carrying effortlessly across the quiet lobby. "Every single card you just handed my staff belongs to a bank that has flagged them for insufficient funds. We have all heard the unfortunate rumors about Marcus Transport filing for bankruptcy and Brad being indicted for wire fraud. I am afraid we cannot extend you credit tonight. You need to step aside." Valerie's face flushes a deep, dangerous red. Her entire social standing, the singular thing she values more than her own children, is bleeding out on the marble floor in front of the exact people she spent her entire life trying to impress. She straightens her spine, desperately clinging to her delusions of grandeur. "How dare you speak to me like that?" Valerie shrieks, pointing a manicured finger at Maxine. "The rumors are completely fabricated. We are simply restructuring our assets. Furthermore, I do not need to pay the entry fee tonight. I am a personal VIP guest of the new premier sponsor who funded this entire gala. We are incredibly close personal friends. You will open those doors for me right now, or I will have the sponsor demand your immediate resignation." Maxine raises an eyebrow, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her face. "Is that right? You are close personal friends with the premier sponsor." Before Valerie can spin another desperate lie, the towering double doors of the main ballroom swing open. The lively sounds of a brass band and clinking champagne glasses spill out into the foyer, immediately followed by the crisp, authoritative sound of heels clicking against the marble floor. I step out of the ballroom. I am wearing a custom-tailored floor-length gold gown that catches the light with every step I take. A diamond necklace rests against my collarbone, subtle but undeniably expensive. My natural hair is styled flawlessly, a crown of absolute defiance against the respectability politics my mother used to police my existence. I am not the quiet, obedient scapegoat they banished to the shadows. I am a titan. The entire lobby goes completely dead silent. The wealthy onlookers, the gossiping church elders, and the club executives stare at me in absolute awe. Valerie jaw drops. The color completely drains from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. Maxine gestures toward me with a graceful sweep of her hand. Valerie, allow me to introduce the new premier sponsor of the Oak Ridge Heritage Club, the founder and CEO of the firm that just saved our community outreach program with a $2 million donation. Valerie stares at me, her mind frantically trying to process the absolute destruction of her reality. The daughter she constantly called a failure, the daughter she abandoned in a hospital waiting room to attend a church mixer, is now the most powerful woman in the building. Valerie realizes her peers are watching her every move. She attempts a desperate, sickening pivot. She forces a wide, trembling smile and steps toward me, opening her arms as if she is about to embrace me. Maya Valerie cries out, her voice dripping with artificial affection. My beautiful, successful daughter, I was just telling everyone that I was here as your guest of honor. I do not move. I do not smile. I look at my mother with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. I let her stand there with her arms open, publicly rejecting the hug in front of the most elite families in the city. The humiliation is absolute. Valerie slowly lowers her arms, her lower lip trembling as she realizes I am not going to play along with her pathetic charade. You do not have a daughter, mother, I say, my voice ringing out clearly in the silent lobby. You made that perfectly clear when you chose a white con artist over your own blood. You made that clear when you told me I was a useless burden. You do not get to claim my success to buy your way back into high society. Your membership expired the moment you stopped valuing character over cash. Valerie gasps, clutching her chest as the surrounding crowd erupts into shocked, delighted whispers. Her entire reputation is officially dead. She has nothing left. I turn my head slightly, looking directly at the two large security guards stationed by the velvet ropes. My voice is sharp, carrying the undeniable weight of absolute authority. This woman is not on the guest list. I instruct the guards, never breaking eye contact with Valerie, escort her off the premises immediately. If she resists, call the police and have her arrested for trespassing. Enjoy your evening in the parking lot, Valerie. Rain lashes against the panoramic glass of my downtown corporate suite, casting gray, distorted shadows across the polished concrete floor. I sit at the head of my glass desk, reviewing the complete financial restructuring plans for the logistics firm I just forcefully absorbed. My assistant is supposed to be bringing me a matcha latte. Instead, a shrill, hysterical screech pierces the heavy, soundproof doors of my office. I am her sister, let go of me, a voice screams. The heavy double doors burst open. My executive assistant stumbles backward as a soaking wet, frantic figure forces her way into my private sanctuary. It takes me a full 5 seconds to recognize the woman standing dripping on my imported Persian rug. It is Chloe, the golden child, the pampered lifestyle influencer who would not be caught dead in anything less than current season couture. Today she is wearing a generic, poorly fitting raincoat and scuffed sneakers. Her expensive hair extensions are matted to her face, with rainwater making her look entirely unhinged. My assistant frantically apologizes, explaining that Chloe caused a massive scene in the lobby, screaming about a family emergency to bypass the front desk security. I raise a single hand, signaling my assistant to step out and shut the door. We are entirely alone. Chloe stands there, shivering, her chest heaving as she clutches a cheap canvas tote bag. She looks around the expansive office, taking in the abstract art, the sprawling leather seating area, and the sheer magnitude of my corporate success. The jealousy flashes in her eyes, sharp and bitter, but it is quickly swallowed by sheer desperation. She marches up to my glass desk, leaving muddy footprints on her way. I need a job. Maya Chloe demands, her voice lacking any of its usual arrogant lilt. Brad accounts are entirely frozen by the federal investigators. The bank seized my Porsche this morning right out of the driveway. Mom and Dad will not even answer my calls because they are too busy packing up the house you stole from them. I have absolutely nothing left. I lean back in my ergonomic chair, resting my chin on my steepled fingers. And what exactly makes you think my technology firm is operating a charity for disgraced finance wives? Chloe attempts to force a warm, sisterly smile, but it looks incredibly grotesque on her panicked face. She places her wet hands on my pristine desk. Because we are blood, Maya. We grew up together. We used to be best friends before you got so obsessed with your computers and your business. Remember when we were little? We used to build forts in the living room and promise we would always take care of each other. You need me here. I have a massive online following. I can be your head of social media. I can rebrand your corporate image for the modern market. You give me a corner office, a competitive salary, and let me stay in your guest room until the divorce goes through. It is the least you can do after ruining my marriage and embarrassing our parents at the country club. The absolute delusion is almost suffocating. She genuinely believes she can rewrite our entire history of abuse by bringing up a childhood fort we built when I was 7. I reach over and tap the sleek wireless keyboard on my desk. The massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall behind me flickers to life. Best friends, I repeat, my tone flat and devoid of any warmth. That is an incredibly creative revision of history, Chloe. I click my mouse. Chloe's own Instagram profile fills the massive screen. Let us look at your recent social media rebrand, shall we? I scroll down to a post from less than 48 hours ago. It features a tearful selfie of Chloe looking tragically beautiful in designer sunglasses. I read the caption aloud, letting my voice project clearly across the quiet office. It is so heartbreaking when toxic family members let new money destroy their moral compass. Cutting off your own flesh and blood because you are consumed by greed is the ultimate sin. Praying for certain people to find God. Chloe's face flushes a dark, humiliated crimson. She takes a step back from the desk, her eyes darting away from the giant screen displaying her own hypocrisy. I am standing right in front of you, I say, my voice dropping to a dangerous low octave. You spent your entire life treating me like a stepping stone. You locked me out of the house. You mocked my ambition. You gladly spent the money Brad stole from our parents, money he stole while hurling racial microaggressions at me in the middle of a restaurant. And now that the gravy train has derailed, and you are facing the actual consequences of your complicity, you want a corner office and a six-figure salary to post inspirational quotes on my company timeline. Chloe begins to hyperventilate the reality of her utter powerlessness settling into her bones. Maya, please, I am begging you. I have $42 in my checking account. I cannot go to a homeless shelter. I am a Blackwell. You were a Blackwell, I correct her sharply. Now you are an accessory to federal wire fraud. However, because I am a fair and equitable chief executive officer, I do have an open position for you. I open my top drawer and pull out a single sheet of paper. I slide it across the glass desk. It stops right in front of her muddy sneakers. Chloe stares at it, her eyes widening with a glimmer of desperate hope. She snatches the paper off the desk, scanning the bold text at the top. Her hopeful expression violently contorts into pure, unadulterated outrage. "What is this?" Chloe shrieks, her voice cracking with fury. "It is an employment application," I reply calmly. "Since I acquired Marcus Transport, I have heavily restructured the logistics division to eliminate the massive debt your husband caused. We are currently hiring for the overnight warehouse shift. You will be loading heavy freight pallets from midnight to 8 in the morning. It pays minimum wage, but it includes basic health benefits after 90 days. If you fill it out right now, I will personally guarantee your interview with the shift supervisor." Chloe shakes uncontrollably. The sheer insult of being offered blue-collar manual labor shatters whatever is left of her fragile sanity. She crushes the application in her fist and violently throws the crumpled paper directly at my face. It bounces harmlessly off my shoulder. "You are a monster," Chloe screams at the top of her lungs, her face twisting into an ugly, hateful sneer. "You enjoy doing this. You enjoy destroying us. You are going to die entirely alone with your money." In a final desperate act of infantile rage, Chloe leans forward and spits a wad of saliva directly onto the pristine surface of my glass desk. She stands there, chest heaving, waiting for me to scream, waiting for me to react with the same unhinged emotion she is displaying. I do not flinch. I do not raise my voice. I smoothly reach over to the sleek intercom console sitting next to my monitor. I press the silver button down with one manicured finger. "Security," I state clearly, my eyes locked dead onto my sister's terrified face. "We have a trespasser in the executive suite. Escort her out of the building immediately." The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swing shut, sealing the courtroom in a tense, suffocating silence. 3 months have passed since the disaster at Le Petit, and today is Brad's sentencing hearing. He sits at the defense table wearing a wrinkled charcoal suit that hangs loosely on his newly diminished frame. Despite the looming threat of a federal prison sentence, he still wears that trademark infuriating smirk. He leans back in his chair, whispering arrogantly to his high-priced defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Sterling. Sterling paces in front of the jury box, actively spinning a narrative dripping with racial bias and calculated privilege. He gestures dramatically toward the defense table, painting Brad as a naive, well-meaning financial consultant. Sterling claims, Brad was aggressively intimidated by Marcus, portraying my father as a corrupt, imposing black business owner running a shady logistics empire. Sterling insists Brad was merely following the terrifying orders of a desperate patriarch. It is the classic defense: blame the black man to save the white-collar criminal. The prosecution calls me to the stand. I walk down the center aisle wearing a sharp crimson suit, the sharp click of my heels echoing off the high ceilings. I am not here as a character witness. I am here as the court-appointed expert. My artificial intelligence firm conducted the absolute forensic data extraction that brought Brad down. I swear the oath, take my seat and adjust the microphone. Sterling immediately approaches the podium. He completely ignores my technical credentials and dives straight into a personal attack, attempting to assassinate my character before I can even present the data. He grips the edges of the podium, narrowing his eyes at me. Is it not true that you harbor a deep, long-standing resentment against this family? Sterling asks, his voice dripping with condescension. Is it not true that Marcus kicked you out of his home when you were 19 years old because you were a rebellious, unmanageable teenager? You were estranged for over a decade. It seems you have a significant personal vendetta against my client by extension. I do not flinch. I look directly at the jury, maintaining absolute composure. I was forcibly removed from my home at 19 because I explicitly refused to forge federal tax documents for my father's trucking company. I state clearly, watching Sterling face tighten. I refuse to participate in the exact culture of financial corruption that your client eagerly exploited to steal millions of dollars. My estrangement is not a vendetta. It is a proven track record of my absolute financial integrity. Sterling swallows hard, realizing his attempt to paint me as a bitter, angry black woman has completely failed. He quickly pivots to the financial data, attempting to overwhelm the jury with complex corporate jargon. He pulls up a printed ledger, waving it dismissively. These offshore transfers were highly complex multinational corporate restructurings. Sterling argues smoothly. You run a software company, not a Wall Street hedge fund. How can you definitively prove my client acted with malicious intent? These IP addresses could have been spoofed by anyone inside the Marcus Transport executive team. I lean forward, clasping my hands on the witness stand. The courtroom instantly transforms from a legal proceeding into my personal boardroom. I do not just answer the question. I surgically dismantle his entire defense. I direct the court's attention to the digital presentation projected on the screens above the jury box. I pull up the exact server logs my artificial intelligence software extracted. Your client did utilize a virtual private network to route his IP address through a server in Switzerland. I explain, speaking to Sterling as if he is an underperforming intern who failed to read the quarterly report. However, your client was incredibly sloppy. 3 seconds after initiating the fraudulent $2 million wire transfer from his spoofed location, he used the exact same device to log into his personal cloud storage account to sync photos of his luxury sports car. Brad's face instantly drains of color. The arrogant smirk vanishes entirely, replaced by absolute visceral panic. I continue, my voice echoing with undeniable authority. Our software matched the unique media access control address of the device used for the wire fraud directly to the laptop seized from Brad's personal home office. Furthermore, the digital authorization token used to sign the transfer documents required two-factor authentication. The security code was sent directly to a mobile device registered under Brad's personal cellular plan. The data is not circumstantial. It is an absolute, undeniable digital fingerprint of federal wire fraud. Sterling stands frozen at the podium. He looks down at his notes, completely out of ammunition. He cannot gaslight digital metadata. He cannot use respectability politics to argue with an unyielding sequence of server logs. Sitting at the defense table, Brad begins to shake. The reality of his situation crashes down on him with devastating force. He is completely cornered. He is being publicly humiliated, outsmarted, and systematically destroyed by a black woman he spent years belittling. His entire worldview, built on an inflated sense of racial and gender superiority, shatters into a million jagged pieces. He cannot handle the total loss of control. Brad abruptly kicks his chair back. The heavy wood screeches against the polished courtroom floor. He ignores Sterling's frantic gestures to sit down. He ignores the bailiff stepping forward. Brad slams his hands flat on the defense table, his face contorted into a mask of ugly, unfiltered hatred. "You think you are so smart," Brad screams at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You are nothing but an arrogant DEI-hired quota-filling." Brad screams a vicious, unforgivable racial slur directly at me, the ugly word echoing violently through the cavernous federal courtroom. The entire gallery gasps in collective horror. The jury physically recoils. The federal judge, a stern woman who tolerates absolutely zero disruptions, stands up instantly. She brings her heavy wooden gavel down with a deafening explosive crack. "Bailiff, secure the defendant," the judge roars, her voice radiating absolute fury. "I hold you in direct contempt of this court." Two armed bailiffs immediately grab Brad by the arms, wrestling him away from the table. He kicks and thrashes, completely losing his mind as they force him backward. The judge glares down at him, her expression completely devoid of mercy. "You just guaranteed yourself the maximum sentence under federal guidelines. Get him out of my sight." The sharp crack of the judge's gavel still echoed in my mind as my driver navigated the Maybach through the gritty industrial park on the south side of the city. The towering glass skyscrapers of downtown gave way to sprawling warehouses and cracked asphalt. We pulled up to a massive lot surrounded by a chain-link fence. This was the former headquarters of Marcus Transport. Today marked the official physical manifestation of the hostile takeover. I stepped out of the luxury vehicle into the brisk morning air, the heavy scent of diesel and rain-slicked pavement filling my lungs. I buttoned my tailored charcoal coat and looked up. A massive industrial crane rumbled loudly overhead. The heavy steel cables groaned as they hooked onto the enormous rusted metal sign that had dominated the skyline for 30 years. The letters spelling out Marcus Transport were faded and peeling. As the crane operators gave the signal, the rusted sign was ripped from its concrete moorings with a harsh metallic screech. In its place, a team of technicians was already elevating a sleek, minimalist digital billboard displaying the bright, forward-thinking logo of my artificial intelligence logistics firm. The old era was literally being torn down and discarded into a scrap pile. I walked toward the main entrance, my heels clicking sharply against the cracked pavement. That was when I saw him. Marcus stood on the outside of the chain-link fence, his hands gripping the metal wire so tightly his knuckles were white. He was wearing an old company jacket, staring up at the crane with a look of absolute devastation. The great patriarch reduced to a spectator watching his empire be dismantled piece by piece. He turned his head as he heard my approach. The devastation in his eyes instantly hardened into a bitter, resentful glare. "You actually did it," Marcus said, his voice carrying a harsh, gravelly edge. "You took my name off the building. You erased 30 years of my blood and sweat. A black man builds a legacy in this city against all odds, and his own daughter tears it down to put up some soulless computer logo." I stopped a few feet away from the fence, completely unfazed by his attempt to weaponize race and history to stroke his own ego. I looked at the rusted sign sitting in the dirt. "Your legacy," I replied, my voice steady and devoid of any warmth. "Let us be very clear about how this legacy was actually built, Marcus. You did not build this empire alone. You built it on the backs of exploited labor, specifically mine. Do you remember when I was 16 years old? I was the one sitting in that freezing dispatch office until 3 in the morning, manually routing your freight lines and balancing your ledgers because you were too cheap to hire a real operations manager. I did your taxes. I optimized your fuel routes. I kept this place running while you were busy trying to buy your way into the elite country club." Marcus tightened his grip on the fence, his jaw clenching. "I was teaching you the value of hard work," he countered defensively. I was preparing you for the real world. You were using me, I stated flatly. You demanded my unpaid labor under the guise of family loyalty. And when I finally demanded a real salary and a seat at the executive table, you called me an arrogant, useless burden and kicked me out of the house. You handed the keys to your precious legacy over to Brad simply because he was a white man in a custom suit who knew how to order an expensive scotch. You trusted his complexion over your own daughter's competence. And how did that legacy work out for you? Your chosen successor drained your accounts to pay for his mistress, and then stood in a federal courtroom, explicitly trying to send you to a maximum security prison. I did not erase your legacy, Dad. I saved you from dying behind bars. The reality of my words hit him like a physical blow. The aggressive defensive posture crumbled. He released his grip on the chain-link fence, his shoulders slumping. He looked down at his scuffed boots, the fight draining out of him completely. He took a deep breath and looked back up at me, his eyes pleading. He was trying to switch tactics, shifting from the angry patriarch to the humbled, desperate father. You are right, Maya, Marcus said, his voice softening into a pathetic manufactured humility. I made a massive mistake. I was blind. I let my pride get the better of me, and I trusted the wrong person. But I have learned my lesson. I see clearly now. You are brilliant. You are the smartest business mind I have ever known. He stepped closer to the gate, reaching his hand out as if to touch my arm. I took a deliberate step back, keeping the distance between us absolute. This company needs institutional knowledge. Marcus continued, his words rushing out in a desperate pitch. You have the technology, but I know the human element. I know the drivers. I know the regional distributors. Bring me back in Maya. Give me a position as a vice president of regional operations. Or even just a senior consulting role. I will work under you. I will report directly to your executive team. Let me walk back through those doors and help you build this new vision. We can do this together, father and daughter, the way it always should have been. I stared at him, feeling a profound sense of disgust. He was not apologizing for abusing me. He was apologizing because he wanted a paycheck. He wanted back into the building so he could pretend to his country club friends that he was still a relevant executive. He wanted to piggyback on the $86 million valuation he had mocked just a few months ago. I reached inside my coat pocket and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I held it out toward him. Marcus reached for it eagerly, a relieved smile breaking across his face, assuming it was a contract for a new executive position. He pulled the documents out and scanned the first page. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by sheer shock. What is this? He demanded, his voice dropping. It is a standard severance package, I explained smoothly. It includes 3 months of health insurance continuation and a modest financial payout calculated based on the liquidated value of your remaining shares, minus the massive debt you accumulated. It is legally bulletproof, completely fair, according to corporate law, and entirely devoid of any emotional attachment. Sign it, take the money, and retire. You are never stepping foot inside this building again. Marcus shoved the papers back toward me, his face twisting with a sudden explosive rage. He realized the manipulation had failed completely. He realized he was permanently locked out of his own kingdom. I will not take this insulting handout, Marcus roared, his voice echoing across the empty industrial lot. You cannot just dismiss me with a piece of paper. You owe me. I put a roof over your head. I am your father. You owe me everything. I looked at the furious, entitled man standing on the other side of the fence. I did not reach out to take the envelope back. I simply let go of it. The crisp white envelope fluttered down, landing directly in the damp diesel-stained dirt at his feet. I owed you respect, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying absolute calm. You charged me trauma. Consider the debt paid in full. I turned my back on him. I did not wait for his response. I walked straight to my waiting Maybach. The driver opened the door and I slid into the luxurious leather back seat. The heavy door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing out the sound of Marcus screaming my name. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked out the tinted window one last time. Marcus was on his knees in the dirt, frantically gathering the severance papers he had just rejected. I faced forward, completely unbothered, and instructed my driver to head back to the city. The past was officially closed. The Maybach carried me back to the pristine quiet of my penthouse. While I was securing the future of my newly acquired logistics empire, my mother was desperately plotting her revenge from a cramped second-floor apartment. Valerie and Marcus had been evicted. Their new reality was a cramped rental with thin walls, peeling linoleum floors, and a view of a busy highway overpass. The scent of stale cigarette smoke permeated the hallway. For a woman who spent her adult life ruling the local country club, the downgrade was a fate worse than death. She could no longer weaponize her wealth, so she weaponized her tears. Valerie set up her smartphone on a cheap plastic ring light. She positioned herself in front of a blank wall, wearing a faded cardigan, to emphasize her newly impoverished state. She hit record. The video was pure manipulation. Valerie sobbed uncontrollably into the camera, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. She wailed about how her own flesh and blood had thrown her parents out onto the cold street. She accused me of elder abuse, claiming I had stolen the family business and left them to starve while I sat on tech money. She stared directly into the lens and begged the internet to cancel my company, demanding the public hold me accountable. The video caught the attention of a gossip blog and gained traction across social media. Valerie knew exactly what she was doing. She expertly wove in heavy religious rhetoric, quoting scriptures about honoring thy mother and father to inflict maximum guilt. She painted herself as a sacrificial black mother who scrubbed floors so her daughter could learn to code. It was a complete fabrication. Valerie spent my childhood hosting lavish church luncheons while leaving me to feed myself frozen microwave dinners. But the internet did not know our reality. They only saw a weeping black woman claiming she had been discarded by a wicked, soulless tech billionaire. Comments flooded in. Strangers called me a monster. They tagged my corporate accounts, threatening to boycott our supply chain software, ignoring the fact that our clients were multinational conglomerates, not individual retail shoppers. The noise was deafening. Valerie posted follow-up videos holding up a worn Bible and praying for my dark soul, insisting all she wanted was for her family to be restored. She was basking in the digital attention, feeding off the sympathy of strangers to replace the country club admiration she had permanently lost. Inside corporate headquarters, the atmosphere was thick with panic. My director of public relations, David, paced back and forth across my glass office. His tablet was loaded with analytics showing a slight dip in our partner confidence scores. He slammed the tablet onto my desk, his face pale with stress. Maya, this is a massive public relations nightmare, David warned, his voice shaking. The optics are absolutely terrible. A billionaire chief executive officer evicting her elderly parents goes against our entire corporate social responsibility mandate. We have board members calling my personal phone. You need to issue a public apology immediately. Better yet, write her a check. Buy her a modest house in the suburbs and have her sign a non-disclosure agreement. We can spin it as a beautiful family reconciliation. If you just pay her off, this entire scandal disappears by tomorrow morning. I sat back in my chair and looked at David with freezing calm. Pay her off, I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You want me to reward a woman who left me to suffer a ruptured appendix alone because she had a church mixer to attend? You want me to hand over my hard-earned capital to a woman who sat at a VIP dining table and defended a white con artist who tried to frame my black father for federal wire fraud? David swallowed hard, shrinking under my intense gaze. I understand the personal history is incredibly complicated, Maya, but the stock price is fluctuating. We have to protect the company. I am protecting the company, I stated firmly, standing up from my desk. I do not bow to manipulation, David. I do not negotiate with emotional terrorists. I do not pay the black tax to a woman who treated my existence as a liability. We are not issuing a weak apology. We are issuing a public execution. I did not release a carefully worded press statement. I did not post a tearful rebuttal video from my car. Instead, I activated my elite media production team. Within 48 hours, my official corporate channels dropped a highly produced 15-minute mini-documentary. The title was bold and unapologetic. Breaking the Chain, The Reality of the Black Tax and Generational Financial Abuse. The documentary was a clinical exposure of the absolute truth. It featured high-definition graphics displaying the exact banking receipts of Brad committing corporate wire fraud. It showed the forged digital signatures and offshore accounts. It included the audio recording of Chloe and my mother plotting to claim I forfeited my trust fund. I spoke directly to the camera, calm, collected, and armed with undeniable data. I broke down the toxic expectation that successful Black women must bankrupt themselves for abusive family members. I laid out the eviction timeline, proving it resulted from Brad draining their mortgage funds, not my sudden cruelty. The internet pivoted with whiplash-inducing speed. The comment sections on Valerie crying videos transformed from blind sympathy to absolute brutal mockery. Major creators stitched her videos with the receipts from my documentary, exposing her fake tears. The religious quotes she used to guilt-trip me were thrown back in her face as people pointed out her loud defense of a criminal. Memes of Valerie fake crying face flooded every major platform. Valerie went from a sympathetic victim to a national laughingstock overnight. She tried to use the court of public opinion to destroy me, but I brought the receipts and the verdict was unanimous. The harsh fluorescent lights of the employee break room at Le Petit buzzed loudly, a sound Chloe had never noticed back when she was dining in the plush VIP room just a few months ago. Her designer wardrobe was gone. The bank had seized her closet along with the house and the sports car. Her high society friends, the women she used to sip champagne with while laughing at my ambition, had blocked her number the second Brad was indicted. Now, Chloe wore a stiff white button-down shirt and a black apron. The fabric scratched against her skin. She grabbed a serving tray, her manicured nails replaced by chipped polish and calloused fingertips. She pushed through the swinging kitchen doors into the main dining area, dreading the lunch rush. Today was supposed to be a standard Tuesday shift. But the restaurant manager had been in a frantic panic all morning, preparing for a massive corporate buyout of the main dining floor. The new owner of Marcus Transport was bringing her entire executive suite for a celebratory luncheon. Chloe did not connect the dots until she walked out with a pitcher of ice water and saw me sitting at the head of the longest table in the room. I wore a tailored white suit, radiating the kind of effortless power Chloe had spent her entire life faking. My executives surrounded me, laughing and discussing artificial intelligence integrations and global supply chain acquisitions. Chloe froze in her tracks. The heavy glass pitcher slipped in her sweaty hands. She ducked behind a large leather menu, pressing her back against a marble pillar, praying to a god she only acknowledged when it was convenient that I would not see her. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. But Le Petit was notoriously understaffed, and her manager barked an order for her to service the executive table immediately. Chloe took a deep, shuddering breath. She plastered on a fake, trembling smile and walked toward my table. Her hands shook so violently that the ice cubes clinked loudly against the glass pitcher. She remembered the last time we were in this building. She remembered screaming that I fabricated the wire fraud documents to ruin her life. She remembered slapping me across the face to protect a white con artist who was using our parents' money to fund a mistress. Now she was pouring my water. I did not gasp when she approached. I did not sneer or point her out to my colleagues to mock her downfall. I did exactly what hurt a narcissist the absolute most. I treated her with absolute unwavering indifference. I looked up from my digital tablet, making direct eye contact with my sister, and my expression remained entirely blank. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice carrying the polite, dismissive tone one reserves for a stranger they will never see again. "We are ready to order the appetizers. Please start with 4 platters of the seared scallops and a bottle of your best sparkling water for the table." Chloe opened her mouth, her lower lip trembling. "Maya," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the corporate chatter. "Please." I did not acknowledge the plea. I turned my attention back to my chief financial officer, picking up a conversation about our quarterly projections. I was discussing a $20 million expansion into the European market, while Chloe stood there holding a notepad like a prop. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. I was not angry anymore. I was not seeking an apology. I simply did not care that she existed. She was completely invisible to me. That extreme indifference shattered Chloe far more than any insult or screaming match ever could have. She had spent her entire life being the golden child, demanding attention, demanding to be the center of the universe. Being reduced to a nameless server in the eyes of the sister she once tormented was a psychological torture she could not process. Her hands shook worse than before. As she reached over to place a bread plate near my elbow, her trembling fingers lost their grip. The heavy ceramic plate slipped crashing onto the table and shattering into 3 jagged pieces. Bread scattered across the white linen. A sharp gasp escaped Chloe's throat. The entire executive team went silent, looking up at the clumsy waitress. Chloe braced herself, closing her eyes, expecting me to scream at her the way she used to scream at retail workers who messed up her orders. She expected me to demand her manager and have her fired on the spot to complete my revenge. Instead, I smoothly moved my tablet out of the way of the debris. I looked up at her with a calm, patient smile. "It is quite all right," I said softly, my voice dripping with lethal politeness. "Accidents happen. Just sweep it up and bring us a fresh plate when you have a moment. Thank you so much." I dismissed her with a slight nod and went back to my conversation. I treated her exactly like the help. Chloe scrambled to pick up the broken ceramic, tears of profound humiliation blurring her vision. She retreated to the kitchen and did not come back to our table for the rest of the meal, begging another server to cover for her. 2 hours later, the luncheon wrapped up. I paid the massive bill with my corporate card, signing the receipt with a smooth flourish. My executives gathered their coats and headed toward the exit, chatting excitedly about the new merger. I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit, and walked out without looking back toward the kitchen doors. Chloe watched me leave from the small service window. As soon as the mahogany doors closed behind me, she rushed out to the long table. Her heart pounded with a sudden, desperate flare of hope. Maybe I had seen her struggling. Maybe my polite demeanor was a sign that the punishment was over. Maybe I had left a check to bail her out of her miserable reality, a peace offering to bring her back into the fold of luxury. She reached the head of the table. Sitting right next to my empty water glass was a single crisp $100 bill. Underneath the bill was a thick white napkin folded neatly in half. Chloe snatched the money, her hands shaking as she flipped open the napkin. She expected a phone number, a promise to call, or an invitation to come back to the penthouse. She expected a lifeline. Written in elegant, flowing black ink were just 5 words. "Actions have consequences. Good luck." Chloe stared at the note, the ink blurring as a fresh wave of hot, bitter tears spilled over her cheeks. The $100 bill felt like burning ash in her hand. It was not a bailout. It was a tip. She crumpled the napkin into her apron pocket, turning back toward the kitchen to finish her long, grueling shift. Finally understanding that the sister she threw away was never coming back to save her. The morning mail delivery at my corporate headquarters usually consists of heavily vetted legal contracts, non-disclosure agreements, and confidential acquisition proposals. My executive assistant knows exactly what clears the strict security protocols. Today she walked into my pristine office holding a single crumpled envelope sealed with cheap adhesive tape. The return address was officially stamped with the dark insignia of a state correctional facility. I took the envelope, sliding a silver letter opener through the rough paper. It was from Brad, even from behind. Federal bars, the sheer audacity of his white privilege practically bled through the cheap ink on the page. He wrote the letter entirely by hand, abandoning the slick corporate jargon he previously used to hide behind, but replacing it with something far more insidious. I was attempting to weaponize forgiveness from behind steel bars. "Maya, I know, we have had our differences in the past." The letter began, lacking any actual accountability for his systemic fraud. "I am sitting in this tiny cell doing my time, and I have lost absolutely everything. My marriage is over. My pristine reputation is completely gone. I have suffered enough. I am asking you as a Christian woman to show a little grace. Drop the ongoing civil suit against my remaining offshore accounts. Let me have a small nest egg for when I get out, so I can start over and rebuild my shattered life. Be the bigger person. Show this family that you are capable of real mercy." I stared at the wrinkled paper. Show grace. Be the bigger person. He had spent years eating at my parents' dining table, using racial microaggressions to constantly belittle my intelligence and actively stealing my family retirement funds to finance a young mistress. Now that he was wearing a cheap orange jumpsuit, he suddenly wanted to invoke Christian charity. He wanted me to play the forgiving black woman who simply absorbs the deep trauma caused by a manipulative white man and miraculously turns it into unearned quiet mercy. I folded the pathetic letter and placed it into my tailored blazer pocket. I told my executive assistant to completely clear my schedule for the entire afternoon and instructed my private driver to bring the car around. I was not going to write a polite formal response. I was going to deliver my ultimate answer in person. The state penitentiary was a bleak fortress of heavy concrete and coiled razor wire, a jarring, ugly contrast to the polished glass walls of my high-rise office. I walked through the harsh metal detectors and strict security checkpoints, wearing a sharp crimson suit, projecting absolute undeniable authority. I was led into the sterile visiting room. A thick panel of reinforced, heavily smudged plexiglass divided the long table. A few minutes later, the heavy steel door on the inmate's side buzzed open with a loud, mechanical clank. Brad walked in. He looked completely stripped of his former arrogant glory. The custom-tailored Italian suits were gone, replaced by an oversized standard-issue prison uniform that hung loosely on his shoulders. He had lost significant weight, and his posture was deeply hunched. Yet the exact moment he saw me sitting on the other side of the glass, a flicker of that old, arrogant confidence flashed in his sunken eyes. He genuinely believed his manipulative letter had worked. He thought I had driven all the way out here to negotiate a peaceful truce. He sat down on the cold metal stool and picked up the heavy black receiver attached to the concrete wall. I picked up my receiver, looking directly into his desperate, sunken eyes. "I knew you would come," Brad said, his voice crackling through the cheap, static-filled phone speaker. He attempted a pathetic, charming smile that failed entirely to reach his eyes. "I knew you had a good heart, Maya. I knew you would not just leave me with absolutely nothing. We can settle this civil suit quietly today. You already took the trucking company. You won the war. Just release the legal hold on the Cayman accounts, and I will sign whatever binding non-disclosure agreement you want. It is just paper money to you anyway." I listened to his desperate, pathetic pitch, my facial expression completely devoid of any sympathy or warmth. "You invited me here today to talk about Grace, Brad," I said, my voice incredibly cold and precise. "You asked me to be the bigger person. You want a fresh start." Brad nodded eagerly, pressing his pale hand against the smudged plexiglass. "Exactly. We can wipe the slate completely clean." I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a single legally stamped document bearing the official seal of the federal court. It was not a generous settlement offer. It was a final, undeniable judgment order. "I am not here to negotiate with you," I stated flatly. "I am here to notify you of the absolute conclusion of my civil suit." I slid the document flat against the glass so he could clearly read the bold print at the very top of the page. Brad squinted, his eyes quickly scanning the dense legal jargon. His eager, hopeful smile instantly dissolved into a sickening expression of absolute visceral horror. "You did not read the specific terms of the corporate asset seizure closely enough before you went to trial," I explained perfectly, enunciating every single syllable. "When you foolishly used the trucking company servers to illegally route those stolen funds, you irrevocably tied those offshore accounts directly to the corporate entity itself. When I executed the hostile takeover of Marcus Transport, I absorbed all of its existing assets, including the stolen capital you thought you so cleverly hid in the Cayman Islands. My legal team filed the final recovery motion yesterday morning." Brad gripped the telephone receiver so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white. "You cannot do that," he hissed, his voice violently shaking with sudden explosive panic. "That is my money. I set up those accounts. You cannot just take everything from me." "I already did," I replied smoothly without blinking. "The accounts have been legally seized and completely drained down to the absolute last cent. But I did not keep the stolen money. I thought deeply about your pathetic request for grace. I thought about how you used your inherent privilege to expertly exploit a hardworking black family. So I took every single dollar from those hidden offshore accounts and donated the exact, massive sum to a venture capital initiative that exclusively funds young, ambitious black female entrepreneurs in the technology sector." Brad stared at me, his mouth opening and closing entirely silently. Your stolen money is currently funding the next bright generation of women who look exactly like me. I continued, my tone dropping to a deadly, unforgiving whisper. Women you would have arrogantly laughed out of a corporate boardroom. You wanted a lasting legacy, Brad. Now you finally have one. You are the involuntary angel investor for black female excellence. Brad completely lost whatever was left of his fragile sanity. He slammed his fists against the reinforced glass, screaming vile obscenities through the telephone. His face turned a dangerous, blotchy shade of red as he hurled insults, completely dropping the pathetic victim act. I did not flinch. I simply placed the heavy telephone receiver back onto the metal cradle, instantly cutting off the sound of his unhinged, violent screaming. I stood up, smoothed the front of my crimson blazer, and turned my back on him forever. I walked out of the sterile visiting room without a single backward glance, leaving him trapped behind the thick glass to rot in the absolute destruction of his own making. Late November swept across the interstate, carrying the promise of Thanksgiving week. Cars blurred past at 70 miles an hour, kicking up slush. Marcus dragged his heavy boots along the muddy shoulder of the highway. He wore a bright orange safety vest. The fabric was a beacon of his public humiliation. He stabbed a trash picker into the wet grass, retrieving a discarded soda cup and tossing it into a black plastic bag. This was his reality. 200 hours of community service. The former titan of local logistics, the man who once demanded the best table at the country club, was now cleaning up highway garbage under the watchful eye of a probation officer. Marcus paused to catch his breath, his back aching from the manual labor. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with a dirty glove and looked up at the overcast sky. That was when the light caught his eye. A massive digital billboard towered directly over the highway overpass. It transitioned from a car advertisement to a sleek, minimalist design. The high-definition screen illuminated the gloomy afternoon. It displayed the unmistakable razor-sharp logo of my artificial intelligence logistics firm. The bold text beneath the logo celebrated our recent expansion and highlighted a new initiative funding minority-owned supply chain vendors. My face was featured on the right side of the screen, projecting absolute authority and uncompromising success. Marcus stood frozen on the side of the road, the trash picker slipping from his grip and clattering onto the asphalt. He stared up at the towering image of the daughter he had thrown away. The sheer magnitude of his catastrophic miscalculation finally crushed his pride. 3 days later, a manila envelope arrived on my desk at corporate headquarters. My assistant flagged it during the morning mail sorting because it lacked a return address. The handwriting on the front was shaky but familiar. It was from Marcus. I sat in my leather chair, the sounds of downtown traffic muffled by the soundproof glass of my corner office. I slid a letter opener through the seal and pulled out 4 pages of notebook paper. The ink was smudged in several places. I unfolded the pages and began to read the agonizing confessions of a broken man. Maya, the letter began, lacking any of his usual commanding authority. I saw your billboard yesterday while picking up trash for my probation. I stood in the mud and looked up at you. I have never felt so small in my entire life. I have spent the last few months sitting in a cramped apartment blaming everyone else for my downfall. But standing on that highway, I finally realized the truth. I destroyed my own life. I destroyed our family. Marcus did not try to gaslight me this time. He did not use religious rhetoric or respectability politics to shield his ego. He wrote about the absolute shame of his choices. I was desperate for validation from the white corporate world. I let Brad walk into my home and steal my crown. I worshipped his background and his skin color because I mistakenly believed proximity to his privilege would make me untouchable. I let him insult you. I let him belittle your brilliance. I chose his lies over your absolute loyalty. I was blinded by my own arrogant pride. You built an empire, Maya. You did it without me. You did it despite me. I failed you as a father and as a black man. I am so profoundly sorry. I kept my eyes locked on the handwritten pages. The silence in my office felt incredibly heavy. For a brief, agonizing moment, the impenetrable corporate armor I had worn for years finally cracked. A sharp heat rushed to the back of my eyes. I was no longer the ruthless chief executive officer sitting in a penthouse suite. I was suddenly the little 8-year-old girl standing in the hallway of my childhood home, holding a perfect report card, desperately waiting for a father who was too busy entertaining his golf buddies to even look at me. I felt the crushing grief of mourning a parent who was still physically alive. I felt the profound tragedy of a father who only realized my value after I had forcefully stripped him of his wealth and his freedom. The tears welled up, blurring the blue ink on the paper. The pain was raw and visceral. He finally understood. He finally saw me. He finally acknowledged the racial and patriarchal dynamics that had poisoned our household for decades. The apology was genuine. It was the exact validation I had craved for my entire life. The heavy oak door to my office clicked open. My assistant stepped quietly into the room holding a tablet with my afternoon schedule. She paused, noticing the shift in my posture and the unshed tears shining in my eyes. She looked at the handwritten pages spread across my desk. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently, her voice full of professional concern. "Do you need me to draft a response to that correspondence? Or perhaps schedule a private meeting for you later this week?" I looked down at the letter one last time. I took a deep breath, letting the cold air of the office fill my lungs. The brief window of vulnerability snapped shut. The little girl seeking validation vanished, instantly replaced by the woman who had built an empire from the ashes of rejection. My features hardened back into absolute stone. I gathered the 4 handwritten pages, aligning the edges perfectly. I turned to my right, hovering my hand over the industrial shredder sitting beside my desk. I dropped the pages into the machine. The mechanical whirring sound filled the room as the sincere apology was destroyed, sliced into 100 meaningless strips of confetti. No reply. I stated, my voice steady and devoid of any lingering emotion. "Cancel my afternoon meetings. Some bridges burn for a reason." The mechanical whirring of the shredder faded, taking his empty words with it. A week later, the crisp autumn chill of late November settled over the city, bringing Thanksgiving Day. For the first time in my life, the holiday did not bring a knot of anxiety to my stomach. My penthouse was alive with warm energy. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed view of the skyline. In the gourmet kitchen, a private chef was busy preparing an absolute feast. The savory aromas of roasted turkey, candied yams, and macaroni and cheese filled the air. There was no walking on eggshells. There was no scrambling to impress judgmental church elders. There was only peace. I was standing by the mahogany dining table adjusting a floral centerpiece when my personal cell phone buzzed inside my blazer pocket. I pulled it out and glanced down. The caller ID simply read, "Restricted." I usually ignored blocked numbers, but expecting a call from my lead investor, I accepted the call and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello," I answered, my voice carrying the relaxed tone of a woman at ease in her own sanctuary. "Maya." The single word was a ragged, wet gasp. The sound of that voice instantly froze the warm blood in my veins. It was Valerie, my mother. She was weeping loudly, the sound a chaotic mixture of genuine sadness and toxic manipulation. I stood perfectly still, my hand resting on the smooth dining table. I did not hang up immediately. Part of me, the chief executive officer, wanted to hear what desperate strategy she was deploying on a major holiday. "Maya, please do not hang up on me." Valerie sobbed, her breath hitching. "It is Thanksgiving. Do you know what we are doing for Thanksgiving? We are sitting in this cramped, freezing apartment. Your father is staring at a blank wall. Chloe is locked inside the tiny bathroom, crying her eyes out because she cannot afford a decent meal. We are eating boxed mashed potatoes. Boxed potatoes. We do not have a turkey. We have no dining room table. We have absolutely nothing." I listened to the wretched description. A stark contrast flashed in my mind. I remembered Thanksgiving 5 years ago. I had spent 12 hours cooking the entire meal in their suburban kitchen. When it was time to eat, Valerie made me sit at the overflow table because Brad and Chloe needed the prime seats next to the church guests she invited. She had paraded Brad around, bragging about his fictional wealth, treating me like hired help. Now, the woman who worshipped country club dinners was sobbing over dehydrated potato flakes. "It breaks my heart," Maya Valerie continued, her voice rising in a frantic pitch. We are your family. Blood is thicker than water. The Lord knows we have struggles, but today is a day for family unity. You cannot leave us to suffer like this while you sit in your glass tower. It is not right. It is a sin against the family. Just tell security to let us up. Please just let us come over and share a meal. We are ready to put all of the ugliness behind us. We forgive you. The air in my penthouse suddenly felt incredibly still. The soft jazz playing through the speakers faded into the background. We forgive you. The sheer audacity of that specific phrase hit me with the force of a freight train. It was not just poor words. It was the ultimate blinding proof of her absolute delusion. After everything that had transpired, after her white son-in-law embezzled millions and tried to send her black husband to federal prison, after she humiliated me at a restaurant, after she posted crying videos accusing me of elder abuse, after she abandoned me in a hospital to attend a mixer, after decades of systematic emotional abuse, Valerie still firmly believed she was the righteous victim. She was incapable of accountability. In her twisted reality, I was the villain who strayed from the flock. I was the wicked daughter who needed to be pardoned for having the nerve to set a boundary. She was offering me her gracious forgiveness for my refusal to let her destroy my life. She expected me to feel gratitude for this twisted clemency. She expected me to weep, apologize, and unlock the doors so she could resume her position at the head of the table. The ghost of the little girl who just wanted her mother to love her evaporated completely. There was no anger left. There was no sorrow. There was only a cold, clinical certainty. Keeping any channel of communication open with this woman was a liability to my peace. She would never change. She would never see my humanity. She would only ever see me as an asset she was blocked from exploiting. I pulled the phone away from my ear, looking out the massive window at the skyline. The sky was clear, bright, and endlessly expansive. I brought the receiver back to my mouth. I did not yell. I did not attempt to explain my trauma to a woman committed to misunderstanding me. My voice was cold, clear, and perfectly steady. I do not need your forgiveness, Mother. I stated the absolute finality of my words, slicing through her ongoing sobs. Enjoy your dinner. I pulled the phone away from my face. I did not wait. I did not wait to hear her scream or hurl another string of bitter, hypocritical religious insults. I tapped the red button, ending the call instantly. I opened the settings on my device, navigated to the restricted number, and permanently blocked it from ever reaching my network again. I set the phone face down on the mahogany table, taking a deep cleansing breath of the rich, savory air in my beautiful home, turning my back on the past forever. The soft chime of this private penthouse elevator broke the absolute stillness of the room. I turned away from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows and walked toward the grand foyer. I smoothed the front of my tailored silk jumpsuit, feeling a genuine smile touch my lips. I reached out and pulled open the heavy double doors. A wave of loud, unapologetic joy washed over me instantly. My foyer was suddenly filled with laughter, the clinking of glass bottles, and the incredible warmth of my chosen family. These were not people bound to me by blood or legal obligation. They were the people who chose to stand by me when I had absolutely nothing to offer them. Elias stepped inside first, his handsome face lighting up the moment his eyes locked onto mine. He wrapped his free arm around my waist, pulling me into a deep, grounding embrace that made me feel entirely safe. He held 2 bottles of rare vintage wine. Right behind him was Professor Sterling. He was holding a perfectly baked sweet potato pie. Professor Sterling had found me shivering outside the university library a decade ago, when my father threw me out into the freezing rain for refusing to forge corporate tax documents. Professor Sterling let me sleep on his living room futon for 3 months. He never asked for a dime in return. Behind him stood Tasha and Jamal, my brilliant lead software developers. They carried silver trays stacked high with seasoned collard greens, roasted turkey, and homemade cornbread. They stayed awake with me for 48 hours straight, writing the foundational code for our artificial intelligence platform in a cramped, unheated garage. They were my true partners in the trenches. I stepped back to let them all flood into the living room. They set the food down on the kitchen island, laughing and joking. There was absolutely zero tension in the air. I did not have to walk on eggshells. I did not have to police my tone or code switch to make anyone feel comfortable. Nobody was quietly judging the texture of my natural hair. Nobody calculated how much my penthouse cost so they could demand a cut of my wealth. There were no performative respectability politics. This room was free of the crushing toxic expectations of the black tax. Everyone here had their own careers and their own profound sense of self-respect. They loved me for the woman I was not, for the financial access I could provide. Professor Sterling handed me the pie, his eyes crinkling with genuine pride. "You have come a very long way from eating microwave ramen noodles on my old couch, Maya," he said warmly. "Look at the life you created for yourself." I hugged him tightly, thanking him for being the father figure I desperately needed when my own biological father treated me like a useless burden. We moved into the formal dining room, taking our seats around the beautifully decorated mahogany table. The crystal glasses sparkled under the modern chandelier. The private chef laid out an absolute feast, blending gourmet culinary techniques with the deep, rich flavors of traditional soul food. We passed the serving dishes around the room, vibrating with shared memories and effortless joy. There was no bitter arguing over who was the most successful. There was no white brother-in-law sitting at the head of the table, making condescending microaggressions about my intelligence. Elias stood up from his chair. He picked up his crystal wine glass, gently tapping the side of it with a silver spoon. The clear, ringing sound brought a hush to the dining room. He looked down at me, his expression completely overflowing with a profound, unconditional love. "I want to propose a toast," Elias began, his rich voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "This year has been incredibly monumental for Maya. We all saw the Forbes article. We all celebrated the $86 million valuation of the company she built from scratch. We watched her revolutionize an entire global industry. But I am not standing up here tonight to toast to her financial portfolio. I am raising my glass to her unbreakable spirit." Elias looked around the table. "We all know what it took for her to get here," he continued. "We know the battles she fought behind closed doors. Maya walked through fire. She faced generational curses designed to break her down. She faced people who tried to extract every ounce of her wealth. But she never compromised her integrity. She never allowed the bitterness of her past to poison her incredible heart. She chose her own path. She chose her own family. And we are all incredibly blessed to be sitting at this table with her tonight. To Maya." To Maya, the entire table echoed in unison, raising their glasses high in the air. I smiled, lifting my own glass, feeling a wave of pure gratitude wash over my soul. I took a sip of the rich wine, letting the smooth taste linger. As laughter filled the air once again, my eyes drifted down to the far end of the long dining table. There was a single empty chair sitting at the head of the table. For a fraction of a second, the ghost of my biological family flickered in my mind. I pictured my mother glaring at me with her performative disgust. I pictured my father demanding my money to save his bruised ego. I pictured my sister weeping her fake manipulative tears. But the images were completely hollow. They held no power over me anymore. I looked at that empty chair and realized it was not a void. It was not a symbol of abandonment. That empty chair was a physical manifestation of my peace. It represented the toxic energy I had permanently removed from my life. It was the boundary I had drawn in the sand. I smiled, turning back to Elias, knowing that my heart was completely full. The soft melodic sounds of genuine laughter and clinking silverware drifted gently from the formal dining room, creating a warm symphony of unconditional love. Maya stood near the head of the long mahogany table, watching her chosen family share stories and pass plates of steaming gourmet food. She felt a profound sense of completion settling deep within her bones. With a quiet, contented sigh, she gracefully excused herself from the lively conversation. She walked across the sprawling living room, her silk jumpsuit catching the soft glow of the modern chandeliers overhead. She pressed her hand against the heavy glass of the sliding balcony door and pushed it open. The freezing, crisp November wind immediately hit her face, but she did not flinch or turn away. She welcomed the sharp, biting cold. She stepped out onto the expansive terrace of her luxury penthouse, letting the heavy glass door slide shut behind her, muting the joyous sounds of the Thanksgiving feast taking place inside. Maya walked toward the thick glass railing, and rested her hands against the freezing metal. She looked out over the glittering, sprawling skyline of the city. Thousands of bright lights twinkled from the towering skyscrapers and busy highways far below. This was the exact city she had conquered completely alone. She did not have a wealthy family to fund her ambitions or co-sign her early loans. She did not have a powerful white son-in-law to open closed corporate doors for her. She had arrived in this metropolis with absolutely nothing but a brilliant mind and a relentless, unbreakable drive. She had built an $86 million artificial intelligence empire from the ground up, fighting fiercely through every closed door and every systemic barrier. She looked down at the financial district, knowing she now owned the very institutions that once looked down on her. As she stared at the blinking lights of the massive banking towers, a rapid montage of vivid memories flashed across her mind. She saw the sterile, opulent VIP dining room at Le Petit. She felt the sharp, stinging impact of Chloe slapping her across the cheek, a desperate, hysterical attempt to protect a crumbling facade of wealth. She remembered the absolute, visceral terror flooding Brad's eyes when he finally read the pink foreclosure notice and realized his white privilege could not save him from the consequences of federal wire fraud. She recalled Marcus collapsing into his chair, stripped of his unearned patriarchal authority, clutching his chest as the reality of his stolen legacy crashed down heavily on his shoulders. She saw Valerie sobbing uncontrollably on the sticky restaurant floor, entirely ruined in front of her high society peers, mourning the loss of her exclusive country club membership rather than the destruction of her family. Maya took a deep, steadying breath of the crisp autumn air. Those memories did not bring her any pain anymore. They brought a profound, unshakable sense of closure and liberation. For 32 years, she had carried the crushing, suffocating weight of the black tax. It was the unspoken toxic expectation that a successful black woman must serve as an endless financial mule for abusive, manipulative relatives. She had been conditioned from childhood to believe that setting boundaries was a sin against her community and her faith. Her parents had ruthlessly weaponized their struggles, demanding she fund their respectability politics and underwrite their gross financial negligence. They expected her to bleed herself dry to maintain the false illusion of a perfect, wealthy family. But Maya had taken a massive sledgehammer to that generational curse. She had ripped the parasitic roots completely out of the ground. She did not just survive the brutal betrayal. She had systematically dismantled their fraudulent empire and built a fortress of absolute peace in its place. The heavy glass door slid open behind her. Warm golden light from the living room spilled out onto the dark balcony, accompanied by a fresh burst of joyous laughter from her chosen family inside. Elias stepped out into the freezing night air. He was carrying a thick, luxurious cashmere throw blanket and two crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne. He moved silently, stepping up right behind her. He draped the heavy cashmere blanket over her bare shoulders, his large, warm hands resting securely on her arms. He pulled her gently against his chest, shielding her from the biting wind. Maya leaned back into his solid embrace, feeling entirely safe and deeply cherished. He handed her one of the crystal flutes. The golden liquid bubbled and fizzed in the dim, ambient light of the terrace. Elias looked out at the sprawling metropolis, his chin resting softly against the top of her head. He took a slow, savoring sip of his champagne. Thinking about them, he asked, his rich voice cutting gently through the whistling wind. He did not need to specify who he was talking about. He knew about the restricted phone call she received earlier. He knew about the boxed mashed potatoes and the desperate manipulative tears Valerie had cried just hours ago. I knew the heavy emotional toll the holidays usually took on her spirit. Maya stared out at the towering buildings, her reflection caught faintly in the balcony glass. She thought about the empty chair at the head of her dining table. She thought about the quiet, pathetic desperation of the people who tried to destroy her life. She lifted her crystal flute, letting the freezing wind whip her natural hair around her face. She took a slow, savoring sip of the champagne. It tasted exactly like absolute, undeniable victory. No, Maya said, her voice incredibly light, crystal clear, and entirely free of any lingering burden. I was just thinking about the future. She turned around in his strong arms, looking back through the glass doors. Inside the penthouse, Professor Sterling was cutting another large slice of sweet potato pie. Tasha and Jamal were debating a new line of software code, roaring with genuine laughter. The room was radiating with pure, unconditional love. "It is incredibly bright," Maya added, a brilliant, unbothered smile spreading across her face. She took Elias by the hand. She turned her back completely on the glittering city skyline and the ghosts of the people who failed her. She stepped back inside the penthouse, the heavy glass doors sliding shut behind them, sealing out the cold night air and the remnants of a broken lineage. The warmth and laughter of the family she built herself enveloped her entirely. The screen fades to black. The core narrative of the sweet revenge trope offers profound life lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the true definition of family. At its heart, this story teaches us that our intrinsic value is never determined by the people who mistreat, underestimate, or marginalize us. Growing up as the scapegoat, in a toxic family dynamic where a golden child is blindly favored and narcissistic relatives continuously undermine your achievements, can leave deep emotional scars. However, the ultimate takeaway is that enduring systematic unfairness does not seal your destiny. Rather, it can become the very fuel for your absolute independence. The narrative beautifully demonstrates the immense power of silent, focused perseverance. By building her own success, maintaining her integrity, and securing her financial autonomy, her ultimate secret weapon, the protagonist proves that the most effective response to disrespect is not screaming matches, but undeniable, irrefutable success. Financial independence acts as an impenetrable shield against familial manipulation, gaslighting, and financial exploitation. Furthermore, this story radically redefines the concept of loyalty. It shatters the dangerous societal expectation that we must endure abuse simply because we share DNA with our abusers. True empowerment comes from recognizing when to walk away from a table where respect is no longer being served. The protagonist's journey illustrates that establishing firm, non-negotiable boundaries is an act of profound self-love, not selfishness. Ultimately, the story teaches us that the sweetest revenge is never about matching cruelty with cruelty. Instead, it is about choosing your own peace, breaking the chains of generational trauma, and consciously building a chosen family, rooted in mutual respect, unwavering support, and genuine unconditional love. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries or distance yourself from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your journey of building resilience and creating your own chosen family in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more empowering stories of reclaiming your self-worth.